Hey, what's going on, everyone? How you guys doing tonight? My name is Matt Jarbo. This is $3 Theater, and there's been a lot of conversation over the span of the last couple of years about what will happen when Kathleen Kennedy eventually steps down, when her reign of terror, so to speak, is finally over at Lucasfilm, and she is done damaging Star Wars. People say that. I've called for her to step down because I think that she has lost control of the community, but we have to actually talk about what it means to be the president of Lucasfilm and what all comes with it. A lot of people seem to forget that Lucasfilm is not just Star Wars. Lucasfilm is ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, Skywalker Sound, a few other divisions as a whole. There was LucasArts, but they closed that one down. I'm never going to fully forgive them for that one. You know what? Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis will return one day, I hope. But being the president of Lucasfilm is not just Star Wars. And so when the subject comes up about what's going to happen once she finally leaves, I see people saying, and with a lot of conviction and passion, which I completely applaud them for having, but they say that it should be Jon Favreau that takes over, that Johnny Fab should be the one to step on in and take over. And that's a bit of a bad call, actually. It's a real bad call. Let me tell you why. Before you get all mad and start hate clicking this video and the dislikes, let me explain. Favreau, whatever, is a creative. He's a damn good creative. This guy has made a lot of my favorite movies. He's been involved in a lot of my favorite projects. I think he's an exceptional talent, and I've been a fan since Rudy, way back in the day. Actually, really more PCU. All right, when he played Gutter. If you know that movie, let me know down in the comments section. If not, go watch that damn movie. It's great. But Favreau is definitely a person who needs to be in the creative seat, not the administrative seat. And this is where we have to start looking at Lucasfilm as for what it is. And that's a business. It's a business. It's a company. There are multiple hundreds of employees. Lots of spinning and lots of moving parts all the time make up the cog that is Lucasfilm as a whole, not just Star Wars. Star Wars is what we see. It's what we tend to see the most of, and that would be their predominant business model would be for Star Wars, but it's a lot more that goes into it. I mean, just go and look up what ILM does. ILM doesn't just do the visual work for Lucasfilm, they do the visual work for anyone who will pay them, and they do a lot of it, and they do a great job. Disney, everyone thinks Disney bought Lucasfilm because of Star Wars. No, they bought Lucasfilm predominantly because of ILM and Skywalker Sound. That is the big moneymaker. That is what's going to be pulling in cash when Star Wars isn't. That is what is the business side of it's all about. It's all about being able to get access to using it and using it at a discount for other projects and using it as a tax write-off for other projects, and also then licensing out or getting hired on for gigs with other studios. And it happens. It happens all the time. ILM does a lot of the CG work for a lot of Hollywood. You don't hear about it as often anymore, but no, ILM is everywhere. And Jon Favreau would have no reason to run ILM. He'd have no reason to oversee the day-to-day operations of ILM. Even though it does have its own president, there'd be no reason for him to be involved in any of that whatsoever. And that's actually what Kathleen Kennedy does. And that is ultimately where the problem lies. You see, Kennedy, who has been in George Lucas's life since the late 1970s, because it's true, she's a big member of his family, one of his most trusted friends. He chose her for a reason, but he also chose poorly. He wanted her to continue his legacy. He felt that she would be the best person to continue the legacy because she has been a producer and produced a lot of movies from our childhood. Hell, I was watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit on Disney Plus the other day, and it gets to the end and it's all executive produced by Steven Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy. And I was like, oh my God, I forgot Kathy Kennedy worked on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Holy crap. As I've said before, and I'll say multiple times, Kathleen Kennedy has had her fingers in pretty much all of our childhoods. And that is just a fact. That's an undeniable, indisputable fact that no matter how much you want to try to rock some kind of odd revisionist history, it doesn't change the fact that she has been involved with a lot of the movies that shaped your childhood. So what went wrong here? She's not a business person. She's a producer. They're not the same thing. There's a little bit of overlap there. There's a little bit of Venn diagram there, but it's not the same thing at all. A producer takes everything on a project by project basis. She normally produces a lot of stuff. If you look at her IMDb, it's insane how many things she's produced through Amblin, which she helped co-create with Steven Spielberg back in the 1980s, with the Kennedy Marshall Company that did a whole bunch of movies, that her and her husband Frank Marshall worked on. And they produced, and that is them trying to find investors and them trying to put together the right project with the right director and the right talent and get it all done. Project by project basis is the best way to describe it. Not overseeing a massive company with a lot of subdivisions that are designed to be a money-making endeavor for the newly minted parent company. That was the biggest problem, is what we saw from an outward perspective was that Kathy was in charge of Star Wars and Kathy was pushing Star Wars. Why? Because Disney wanted to push Star Wars. They didn't push Indiana Jones. They didn't push Willow. They're now working on another Indiana Jones movie and they're now working on a Willow TV series. But you know what? I mean, people think of Lucasfilm when they think Star Wars. And so that does make a lot of sense. And that's what happened, is what we saw from a marketing and advertising perspective was simply all just Star Wars. So her decisions and lack thereof and failings, of which there are many in regards to Star Wars, definitely shows that she's not the right person to spin all those plates and juggle all those balls and keep everything moving the way that the president and CEO of Lucasfilm has to do. So what makes you think that someone like Jon Favreau is going to be the same? Or going to be able to do anything different? He's a creative. He's a person who directs movies. He executive produces movies. He creates. Do you really want that person having to then move over and start trying to keep all those other balls in the air? ILM, Skywalker Sound, whatever else they want to have coming out of the pipe. The fact that they're kind of split between not only San Francisco, but Los Angeles. There's a lot of factors involved with Lucasfilm. It's not just Star Wars. And so many people out there don't know that. And that's okay because no one ever talks about it, right? But here's something you should know. Because let me ask you this. Who do you think was running Lucasfilm? You would say George, because it just seems to make sense. Right? George Lucas stopped. He took over Lucasfilm, or he gave it to Kathleen Kennedy, then he stepped down. Well, that is true. He was the chairman of Lucasfilm, but he's not the president or chief operating officer of Lucasfilm, because from 2003 to 2012, it was actually Micheline Chau. Now, this says here that she served as the president and chief operating officer of Lucasfilm LTD from April 2003 to September 2012, and served previously as Lucasfilm's chief financial officer from 1991 to 2003. Her retirement from Lucasfilm coincided with the Walt Disney Company purchase of Lucasfilm in late 2012, when Kathleen Kennedy assumed her position. And then since 2013, she's been doing other stuff. She was the chief financial officer of Lucasfilm for 10 years. From 1991, 12 years, from 1991 to 1993, which means that she oversaw the start of the prequel. She oversaw the merchandise. She oversaw the toys. She oversaw the getting into the animated project. She oversaw what we know as Star Wars. She took that over and she gave us Star Wars: The Clone Wars. It was actually, she was a big part of that. She kept a lot of it on track. The animated shows, the video games, everything else. A lot of it was her. She's an unsung hero because she did keep Star Wars on the straight and narrow while Lucas was also working on getting everything else he wanted to do done. There are people out there who have run Lucasfilm that are mostly money people, while George, who's a creative, focused on the creative that he wanted to do. Again, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about who are the people literally behind the curtain, the names at the top that we don't see. Micheline Chau is only one of many over the years that have had severe influential positions at Lucasfilm that predominantly were money people. And so when you see people that say, yeah, we need Johnny Favs to come in and take over Lucasfilm, no, what you want and what you should change the conversation to is you want Jon Favs to come on in and take over Star Wars. because Star Wars is just a subdivision of Lucasfilm. In fact, Star Wars was its own corporation. True, this is true. Lucas, back in 1978, formed the Star Wars Corporation LTD, or LLC, whatever, the Star Wars Corporation. And he went to another guy and he said, hey, you run it for me, which, by the way, handled all of the toys, the merch, the holiday special, all of that stuff. You run it for me, and as long as I'm making money, you get to keep your job. And eventually that ended up going away, but that's how Lucas wanted to run it. He brought in a real estate guy. This guy was a real estate guy. Brought him in to run the Star Wars Corporation. As long as George was making money, he could then go off and work on the movies, work on what he wanted to do. That's how this whole thing works out. Yes, Lucas is a creative who created this company with all these moving parts and all these spinning plates and all these bouncing balls, but it was a finance person and a lot of money people that were the ones that were making sure the day-to-day kept going. Kathleen Kennedy is a producer, not a money person, which is why her successor should probably be a money person, a person who understands the ins and the outs of how to run a studio and all of its smaller moving bits to run it like a business, while letting Kathy produce more movies back with her husband, or letting Favreau or Filoni take over the Star Wars brand and mold it towards the future. That's what it needs to be. That's what needs to happen. Feige runs Marvel Studios. He's really good at producing, and everyone loves Feige. But Feige oversees so much. I mean, just look at his plate. Marvel Studios, Marvel Television. Now he's chief operating officer, basically, of Marvel Entertainment. He does so much that he has access to, but he's also not a creative. He's not the person who's writing the scripts and coming up with the stories, really, or the one who is like putting it all together. His job is to oversee the projects and to make sure the right people are in the right position and give his input where he can and make sure the vision is on track with what he wants. Him taking over Star Wars would be great, but not taking over Lucasfilm, because there's so much more there than literally just one brand, which would be Star Wars. So we got to think smarter on this conversation, because a lot of people don't quite understand where it's at. And I get that. There's a lot of information about Hollywood that people don't know. But if you look at everything that's gone down with Lucasfilm, it's always been money-backed people or money incentivized people who have kind of run the show, run the day-to-day to let the creatives create. The problem was putting a creative in a non-creative position and then expecting them to kind of, take over the goose that laid the golden egg and make sure they don't crack the egg. And that's where the problem came. So no, Jon Favreau should not be in charge of Lucasfilm. He should not, but he should take over Star Wars. Anyway, what are your guys' thoughts on this one? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I want to hear them. Let me know down in the comments below. I'll talk to you all later. Have yourself a great day. Be sure to hit that like and hit that subscribe and smack that bell. And if you want to support the channel, Patreon in the link in the video description. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day and peace out.